August 1941. Wing Commander Douglas Bader is flying his final mission.
He's probably what we would now call an adrenaline junkie.
In 16 months, he's flown 100 combat missions,
He was such a magnificent pilot.
notching up 20 kills.
I couldn't do that with the legs that God gave me. And he could do it with tin legs.
On a search and destroy patrol over occupied France, Bader has finally run out of luck. This is the story of how Douglas Bader, a man with no legs, conquered extraordinary odds to become Britain's most celebrated air ace.
Douglas Bader has an early childhood ambition to go to RAF Cranwell, which is the training college. He's an exceptional athlete, and in the corridors, they've got all the team photos of the squash teams, the tennis teams, the rugby teams, and he's a star pupil there. He comes second in his group when he passes out in 1931. He's a very bright individual as well. He's a clever man, but he also shows exceptional flying skill.
Trauma to the right knee, left leg broken, 2 places. Please keep calm, Mr. Bader.
Can you tell me to calm down? I'll blow myself to buggering bits.
8 years before the Battle of Britain, it looks like Douglas Bader will never walk again, let alone become Britain's most iconic war hero. It's 1931. Bader is an impulsive 21-year-old RAF pilot with a reputation for aerobatics.
Doing acrobatics is very, very difficult. It's very, very highly skilled. Turns, barrel rolls, dancing around the sky. That's the point of being a pilot, because a biplane is all about maneuverability. It's not about speed. And at this, Bader is absolutely one of the very best, most highly skilled pilots in the country. The accident comes in December 1931, and he's performing a move that he's done many, many times before, but he's quite new to the Bristol Bulldogs, top-of-the-range fighter that have just come into service.
Christ, what are you doing?
Doing this precision, very close-quarter flying is really, really hard.
On a dare, he flies too low, too fast.
And you only need to misjudge something at that level by a foot or two at that speed, 100 miles an hour, in a biplane, wing touches the ground, you total it, and it's just as simple as that. He admits himself, I just made a mistake.
They thought he was actually dying. He heard 2 nurses talking, and one said to the other, "Shush, there's a boy dying in there."
Doctors find Bader's right leg shattered beyond repair, so they amputate it above the knee. With gangrene setting in, they have little choice but to amputate his left leg as well.
Of course, it was terrible. Can you imagine, the age of 21, losing both your legs?
This is where they'll make you better.
Two artificial legs are made for Bader, so he can begin the agonizing process of rehabilitation.
His doctor says to him, look, you've got to face facts. You're never going to walk again without a stick.
No! No, I've got to do it. You can take this blasted thing with you.
And he thinks, right, I'm absolutely never, ever going to use a stick. And he never does. ever.
He accepts that the accident was his fault and attempts to lead as normal life as possible. But remember, this is the 1930s, and he'd be regarded as a cripple, and those people were not expected to lead a normal life. But Bader doesn't give up.
During his recovery, Bader also finds time to date a local waitress, Jill Lucas's older sister, Thelma.
Thelma always thought that he would be somebody special, because, of course, my mother wasn't at all happy about this engagement. You know, a man with no job, no money, and no legs was not exactly the person you'd choose for your beautiful daughter to marry, was it?
Douglas and Thelma tie the knot, but the disabled pilot struggles to adjust to life outside the RAF.
He has 6 very long, miserable years in the 1930s where he becomes a clerk with the Shell company, who actually look after him very well, it has to be said, just itching for his chance to fly again.
With gritty determination, Bader learns to drive again. Amazingly, he also learns to fly again, which was unprecedented for the time.
He then goes up into the air, and having not flown for God knows how many years, having not flown a 400 horsepower single-seater monoplane aircraft before, and it's just, you know, the years melt away. And he's a complete natural. It absolutely comes straight back to him, and he flies it around the air absolutely beautifully.
When Hitler marches into Poland, Bader is more than ready to play his part.
He was excited. He kept rushing about saying, they'll have to have me now. And he said, you know, you're terribly short of pilots, and you know that I'm an experienced pilot, and I suggest you let me join up immediately. And after a pause, they said yes. It was like a life sentence prisoner suddenly being told he was free.
I was 19 when he came back, and he was, what, 29, 30 or thereabout. So he came back with quite a reputation of being a rather difficult man, in the nicest possible way.
Spitfire pilot Tom Neal joined the RAF Reserve in 1938. He was typical of the youth and inexperience lined up to face the Nazis.
You were taken out to the airplane and said, all right, well, now fly it. And suddenly you were faced with an aircraft which had a 1,030 horsepower engine, who went at 450 miles an hour.
Douglas Bader's first taste of action comes on June 1st, 1940. The Nazis have stormed across Europe, and British troops are surrounded at Dunkirk. Bader's squadron is tasked with providing air cover while the retreating Allies make their escape across the Channel.
Bader's first combat, he actually had a massive stroke of luck because he comes up against a young, inexperienced German pilot, and Bader just swings in behind him at about 3,000 feet, expecting this guy to suddenly duck out of the way, dive out of the way, take evasive action. And he doesn't, he just stays there. So Bader goes right up his backside, opens fire with his 8 Browning, and the guy just goes straight down into the sea.
Bader's first kills, a Messerschmitt 109 fighter and Heinkel 111 bomber.
In many ways, he has a further advantage by having no legs, and that is the tighter the turn you do, it causes negative gravity, which then causes the blood to drain from your head down to your toes, and then you actually black out. But because Bader doesn't have any legs for the blood to flow to, his blackout point is much less than your ordinary pilot.
For Bader, it's a personal triumph set against the backdrop of Britain's darkest hour.
We'd been knocked out. No army, navy somewhere up in Scotland, and only fighter command, basically, to keep the Germans at bay.
Bader is a born leader, and at 29, much older than the raw recruits flooding into the RAF.
He quickly becomes a section leader, then he becomes a flight lieutenant, and he's an obvious choice, post-Dunkirk, to become a squadron leader. Absolutely obvious choice. I mean, it's blindingly clear that this is where he needs to be.
He's made commanding officer of 242 Hurricane Squadron based at Duxford near Cambridge. Promotion, however, comes with a sting.
242 Squadron, like many of the squadrons that have been in action over Dunkirk and over France in the dark days of May and early June, you've got to remember that a lot of these pilots have been together for a long time, so they're a very close-knit bunch, and suddenly a third of them have gone. So morale is low.
Worse still, his demoralized men aren't even British. They're what many in the RAF top brass regard as second-rate, undisciplined, unreliable Canadians.
242 Squadron was a Canadian squadron, and he walked in to meet them, and they said, that's all we need now. We've got a man with no legs.
Many of the battle-weary, ragged Canadian pilots are barely out of school. The Nazis are massing on the other side of the channel, preparing for invasion. Botter has no time to lose in turning his sorry excuse for a squadron around.
Gentlemen, I'm your new squadron leader.
Horse shit. Sir.
On your feet, please. Let's get this girl flying.
Seeing red, Botter decides to show who's boss.
Natural flying ability, he shows that the legs don't matter at all. His force of character, he doesn't make a fuss about it, he doesn't use a stick. The fact that he's so obviously competent and brilliant in the air, the disability just melts away. And very quickly, people within the squadron forget that here's a man with no legs.
I mean, it was so clever of him to know what to do, to show them that he could fly better than they could.
Botter seized this moment to go out, get into an aircraft, and show by demonstrating how he handled that aircraft and busted up the airfield. The Canadians at that point knew they had a leader they could respect.
Botter has proved his credentials. Now he must lead 242 Squadron against the massed ranks of the Luftwaffe, hell-bent on destroying the RAF. July 1940. Britain is on its knees. All that stands before imminent Nazi invasion is a thin blue line of RAF fighter pilots like Douglas Botter. His first task as squadron leader is to secure new uniforms for the demoralized men of 242.
Get in. Get in. Here.
They were wearing sweaters and sort of some old pair of trousers, and Douglas was horrified. Canadians are not servile, and they felt they'd been very poorly treated one way and another. He was exactly the right person. They adored him.
Botter isn't afraid of rank. Breaking protocol, the squadron leader goes straight to the top to get desperately needed parts for their Hurricanes.
Yes, put me straight through to Sir Hugh.
Alan Smith flew with Douglas Botter and knew him well.
He would say to any high-ranking officer, look, I'm not sending my men out unless you do something about whatever the problem was.
It's Barter here, with 242. I want a meeting regarding...
He would care of his men and his ground personnel. The ground people thought he was great.
Planes, non-operational. Missing vital parts. Get all of that?
Douglas simply got onto the Air Ministry and made such a fuss. I can imagine them saying, oh, for heaven's sake, let's shut him up, send the spare.
Botter is relentless in his quest to turn 242 into a fighting fit force. He has strong ideas on the best way to shoot down Nazis.
He was very keen on the flying and the tactics. They used to load up with crates of beer and come down to our house, have a party. But all they did was talk about aeroplanes. They used to discuss it endlessly.
In fact, you should all listen to this. Always come from high, and always have the sun behind you. I'll show you here with the pipe and the bulb. Invisible, see?
That's it, old boy, out of the sun. Now come in and settle in next to me. Good move, old man.
And what Barder can do is he can use all his experience as an early 1930s pilot and then as his time of 19 Squadron at the beginning of the war and teach these guys some tricks, get them in the air, get them dogfighting.
Thank you, sir.
Barder has the three mantra that he religiously believes in. Get as close as you possibly can. None of this 400 yards nonsense. Get in at least 250 yards, if not 150. Always have the sun behind you wherever you possibly can. And always have the height advantage.
Beware of the Hun in the sun, because if you're looking in sun, you can't see anything. Christ, I'm in the wrong place in the wrong time.
Hitler knows he must win the air war before he can invade Britain. His Luftwaffe chief, Hermann Göring, boasts it will take just 4 days.
German plan for invasion of England. Phase 1. Knock out the Royal Air Force and its bases. Get control of the air and the sea lanes across the channel. Destroy communication and transport lines. Above all, get command of the air.
Doing a cross-channel invasion is no easy matter, and Hitler doesn't really know what to do. And in actual fact, throughout June, he first of all finishes off France, and then into July is pondering what his next move is. He's hoping that Britain is just going to sue for peace. But Britain, with Churchill at the helm, has no intention of doing that.
The question on everyone's lips, when will the Nazis make their move?
What you have is long days of boredom, where you're kicking around the dispersal hut. You have to be there because you might be called out at any minute. There's not a lot to do. And if you're a man of action like Barder, you're not someone who can just sit there and plough through War and Peace. You're restless, you're pacing up and down, you're playing cards, you're thinking more tactics. Perhaps you might even be thinking too much.
Finally, on Friday the 13th of August, the Nazis launch an all-out air attack. The Battle of Britain is on. To Barder's frustration, his men are not one of the 11 group squadrons stationed on the front line. 242 begins the battle stationed at RAF Cottish Hall, 120 miles northeast of London. A long way from the action.
Get us in the bloody air, Woody. We need to be there. We're ready.
Of course, one of the reasons why Barder isn't posted to 11 Group is because he can't scramble into the air in 3 minutes. He's pretty good on his pegs, but he can't run to his Hurricane.
The alarm would sound, you'd have to drop everything and run.
Tom Neal has clear memories of life as a 20-year-old Spitfire pilot fighting Germans.
The rules said that you had to be airborne within 3 minutes. And a lot of people did their fighting in their pajamas. And it was an embarrassing moment where they'd be shot down, force landed, and they'd have the pajamas.
For 2 weeks, the Luftwaffe pounded the RAF's air defenses in southern England. The odds are staggering. German planes outnumber British 3-1.
242 Squadron Scramble, Angels 15 North Wheel.
242, scramble!
When the Luftwaffe starts ranging deeper into Britain, Barder finally gets his moment. 242 is scrambled to defend an airfield at North Weald, 30 miles north of London. Using the sun as a shield, 100 Junkers 88 bombers flanked by Me-109 fighters approach fast from the west.
As fighter pilots, we often had to escort bombers on missions.
Luftwaffe Air Ace Hans Eckehard Bob flew the feared Messerschmitt 109 fighter during the Battle of Britain.
So imagine, one layer of clouds beneath us and one layer above. All of a sudden, English fighters came upon our formation directly from behind us and began their attack. That was such a shocking experience for us and made us realize that something technical had to have made that possible. Something we didn't know anything about yet.
The RAF may be hugely outgunned, but they have a secret weapon in their arsenal. British scientists have developed the world's first early warning radar. Underestimating radar is the Luftwaffe's first tactical error. It saves the RAF from destruction in these first weeks of the Battle of Britain. And it's radar that sends Bader to 18,000 feet. He and his fellow pilots are heading for one of the most ferocious dogfights of the Battle of Britain.
Vector 270, Angels 18. Enemy aircraft, 10 o'clock, level.
Bader and his men have just 9 fighter planes ranged against the tidal wave of approaching Germans. What's more, the men from 242 are flying yesterday's technology, the Hawker Hurricane. It's easily outclassed and outrun by the modern, all-steel Messerschmitt 109. A biplane converted into a single-wing fighter, the Hurricane's steel and wood frame is wrapped in flimsy canvas.
And while the British fighters were only equipped with machine guns, we already carried small cannons. This means that if you were able to take aim, the German weapons had the advantage that a fired shot was deadly most of the time.
The Hurricane did have one tactical advantage over the Germans' Messerschmitt 109, as Tony Pickering, a 19-year-old pilot who flew with Bader, remembers.
It could outdive a Hurricane, and it could outclimb a Hurricane, but we could turn inside them.
And the English would try to gain the advantage in a dogfight by flying tight corners.
Bader and the Hurricane pilots put their advantage to work.
Level flight, it would be, I would say, 30, 40 miles an hour faster than we were. But if he came behind us, all we need to do was do a quick turn around. He couldn't keep with us then. He couldn't turn inside us. And you could bring a Hurricane round, probably a little bit more clumsily, but it would come round and be on the tail of the Messerschmitt 109 before we knew what to do.
Bader and his Hurricanes have climbed 3,000 feet above the enemy. His tactics: use height as an advantage, use the sun as a shield, get lethally close. One by one, 242 picks off the stragglers.
Our tactics were to get slightly above them, come down on them at full throttle, with 3 of us in line abreast and another 3 probably 50 yards away in line abreast, and go straight into the bombers. You should have fired actually from about 300 yards. I don't doubt we were firing at 400 yards, and by the time we got to within about 100 yards of the bombers, down we went underneath them, before the 109s could pick us off.
Bloody bastards. This is our bloody sky.
By day's end, Bader and his men have claimed 12 scalps with no losses, a remarkable achievement for a squadron that weeks ago was in tatters, now licked into shape by a man with artificial legs.
He was supposed to be guarding the airfield, and he'd gone off after these German bombers that he'd seen and shot down a lot. And when he got back, Lee Mallory rang him and said, what have you been up to? Keith Park's been on the phone saying you've been poaching on his territory. I mean, you couldn't believe it, could you? Well, says Douglas, we shot down 15 or something, you know.
The tide is turning in the Battle of Britain. Wave after wave of Nazi bombers attempt to blast Britain into submission. But the RAF is holding fast. Douglas Bader and his men are celebrating their tally of 12 kills in a single day. In just a few weeks, the double amputee has turned his ragtag band of unruly Canadians into an elite fighting force. Flushed with success, Bader starts pushing his big tactical idea, Big Wing.
At the beginning of the Battle of Britain, it was usual for RAF squadrons to attack German bomber formations singly. It was Bader's idea to attack with multiple formations.
Douglas's idea was that he would take a larger group of aircraft and get into the Huns, you know, a little bit later than we did.
We've done a bloody good job here, boys. Bloody good job.
It's time we're on the offensive.
The RAF's proven tactic is to repel German raids with short, sharp guerrilla attacks. Bader's bold but controversial vision is to do the opposite. Send up hundreds of fighters to meet the Germans head-on.
He starts to convince himself that actually what is required is attacks by massed formations of fighters, not willy-nilly little bits of squadrons pecking at the Luftwaffe as they come over. Far better to have a mass of 3 to 5 squadrons together, some 50 aircraft in the air at one time, attacking a big formation.
Big Wing has the added personal advantage of ensuring he and his men are in the thick of the action, not stuck on the ground at the rear.
It'll be a moment where we stop them.
Bader's philosophy was, me first, I'm next, anything left I'll have. And that equated to being around in big formations. You know, it's all part of him. And he was a gallant man in many ways, and you need them in wartime, but not too many of them. And he was one of those chaps.
By chance, pilot Tony Pickering overhears a furious fight between 2 of the Allies' greatest fighter pilots, Douglas Bader and South African ace Sailor Milan.
Before they reach the target. You're not listening to what I'm saying.
I could hear those two arguing like mad about this big wing lark. You see, Bader was a big wing man, and Sailor Milan was single squadrons.
It takes you longer to get to Kent than it does the Germans.
Yes, but if we're able to rendezvous in the same...
Now, most of us, we always thought to ourselves, well, there are other people who know more than I do. I'll listen to what they're saying and things like that. I'm not too sure as Douglas Bader listened too much to what other people said. We probably thought he was a little bit over the top.
Are you joking?
They'd be telling each other they didn't know what they were talking about.
No, don't take that tone with me.
You and your squadron, what do? You don't do anything. All you've got is 12 pilots, and what good do you do?
What you want to do is scare them off with some stupid bloody...
All you've got is 12 bloody pilots! It's absolute...
Gentlemen, please.
Quite frankly, it frightened me, let's put it that way. But they were good officers, and they were good both doing their job. One was leading a large wing, the other one was usually leading a squadron.
Bader didn't originate the idea, but he becomes its biggest cheerleader, and 242 Squadron joins in a number of big wing sweeps. Even today, the tactic remains controversial with some of the young men who took part.
On the 15th of September 1940, there were 2,000 aircraft in the sky at once. And we would be coming back to North Weald, you know, our tongues hanging out, lost half your people. And there would the Duxford wing, 60 strong, saying, my goodness, where are the enemy now? The enemy had long since gone home. We knew as the fighting people further south that flexibility in battle was the best thing, and we should have been flexible and not going around in huge formations.
Tactically, Big Wing is not doing what Bader and Lee Mallory are saying it is. Its value is in the psychological damage it causes to the Germans, which is not what Bader wants. You know, that's not what he's claiming for it. But it does have its value.
Did it work? Some people said it took too long to form up to be effective. But it has to be said that later in the war, the big wing strategy was copied by the Germans.
Despite wave after wave of German bombers pounding Britain, the Allies are gaining the upper hand. The RAF shoots down 2 Luftwaffe planes for every plane lost. By October 1940, the Battle of Britain is won, the Nazis' first significant taste of defeat. When Prime Minister Winston Churchill thanks the few for their sacrifice, he's talking about men like Douglas Bader and fellow fighter pilot Tom Neal.
During the 16 weeks of the Battle of Britain, I flew 141 times. It's a lot of times. Sometimes five times a day. I flew more intensively than almost anybody person during the Battle of Britain. The average number of flights flown was about 50. Some of them were shot down the first go. Some of them lasted something longer than that, but it was very rare that it would have got to 140. I put this down to the fact that I was very good at ducking and weaving.
In March 1941, Bader wins promotion to wing commander and a posting to Tangmere on England's south coast. The man with 2 false legs is now on the front line in the thick of the action, facing his biggest battle yet. He's swapped his workhorse Hawker Hurricane for the state-of-the-art Supermarine Spitfire. His men remember their new boss making a dramatic entrance.
This single Spitfire came across the sky and he did 2 slow rolls, 1 flip roll, and then side slip to lose height. He was such a magnificent pilot. There's no way you can explain it why a particular person can make a particular piece of machinery do things that nobody else can.
And I said to the chap at the guard room, "Who's that?" And he said, "That's Mr. Bader." And I said, "I couldn't do that with the legs that God gave me. And he could do it with tin legs."
And then Douglas would put it down as gentle as a daisy. Whereas most of us would crash. He taxied in, switched off, and the little side panel for getting out, and did the side panel, and out came the leg. And he just said, "Who are you?" "Smith, sir. Sergeant Smith, sir." He said, "You'll do." He chose me to fly with him. And, you know, like Jesus saying, "Come now."
Right then, gentlemen, what we're looking at here is fairly straightforward, so pay attention. What we're planning on doing is sending 2 sweeper missions to here and here.
Wing Commander Bader is now in charge of 4 squadrons, the Tangmere Wing.
Airfields here are completely loaded with 109s.
The Battle of Britain is over, and the RAF is on the offensive. Bader's job is to lead search and destroy raids over enemy territory.
We can do what they do, but even better.
And what they decide is that actually what they're going to do is big fighter sweeps over the Channel and back into northern France and try and destroy the Luftwaffe on the ground, which is exactly, of course, what the Luftwaffe are trying to do in 1940 and at which they fail at. These are called rhubarbs, these big fighter sweeps, where you would have masses of multiple squadrons, certainly wings of 3 squadrons, and sometimes you would have as many as 6 squadrons in the air at one time, 50 to 100 fighters. And they do shoot down a lot of enemy aircraft, there's no question about it. But they also lose a lot in the process because they're suffering from exactly the same disadvantages now that the Luftwaffe was suffering in 1940, i.e. if you get shot down over England and you're a British pilot in 1940, you can be up in the air again by that afternoon. If you get shot down as a British pilot over France, you're not going to be flying again that afternoon because you're going to be a prisoner of war and that's you out for the rest of the war. So there is real mixed views about the use of these rhubarbs and the value of them. But for someone like Bader, who is very keen to be in the thrust of action and be absolutely in the front line, he's all for it. And you're not having to scramble in 3 minutes because you're not reacting to something anymore, you are deciding where you are going to do your fighter sweeps. So typically you would have a briefing the night before, and you would know that at 10 o'clock that following morning, weather permitting, you were going to be taking off on a rhubarb over northern France or wherever it might be.
Despite his new rank and responsibility, Botter remains the same daredevil pilot of his youth. He splits opinion right down the middle.
I flew with him very often, but he very often put us in danger's way. Our first invasion of airspace in France, he led us as a formation, and we were supposed to go across at 7,000 feet. We suddenly found ourselves going across at 5,000 feet, at 2,000 feet, and at 800 feet, and being shot at like mad from the ground, all because of Douglas Bader. And we lost 1 or 2 people on that particular do, because he didn't obey the rules, and this was typically Douglas Bader. He was a mind unto himself, because he was just Douglas Bader. He just wanted to do it his way, and of course you all had to follow, but hey-ho.
Someone can call themselves a fighter race if they've scored 5 confirmed aerial victories. Now, Bader does achieve that in the Battle of Britain, but most of his successes, his fighter successes, come in 1941 when he's leading his wing over to France on those rhubarbs, those sweeps over France. That's when his score escalates.
How you're written about, you become a hero because people write about you. But I'm never mentioned at all. I fought like mad, but nobody ever mentioned me until after the war.
Typically, Botter flies into battle leading from the front. His loyal wingman, Alan Smith, flies to the right and slightly behind, always watching Botter's back.
In the middle of a battle over France, which were frequent and several times a day, you had what was called a beehive, which was Messerschmitts and Spitfires and Hurricanes, all literally a beehive. It's a good word to describe it. You were sweating because there was bullets flying around and parachutes in occasion. And then suddenly this calm voice over the air says,
Yes, I quite forgot to book the squash court for 7 o'clock this evening. Would you mind doing it for me? Bit indisposed at the moment, old chap.
for Christ's sake, if all he's worrying about, why are we worrying about all these bloody Germans that are all over the place? You immediately felt calm. To hell with the Germans, we'll play squash at 7 o'clock tonight.
No.
Botter is relentless, working himself and his pilots into the ground. In one frenzied 8-day spell, he claims 12 kills. The pace takes its toll.
He had to take painkillers all the time. But you see, that was just part of it. He never admitted that anything was wrong in any way. When he was walking and all his weight was on these tin legs, it was painful and restricting. But when he was sitting in the cockpit, he could do that without any difficulty at all. And all he was thinking about was getting back to it somehow.
Hello there, boys.
Botter has been in the heart of the action for more than a year.
There is also a feeling that Bader is also coming near the end of his operational use. There is a point where you've just been doing it for too long. Most people didn't do more than 6 months. Bader had done 18 months and more. The plan is to wait till the autumn, wait till sort of September, something like that, and then he'll go and do a different job, instructing or whatever it might be, and have a break from operational flying. But he doesn't, and he doesn't take the chance to step down when he could have done.
I thought you would like to know, sir. The cannon on the Spitz are getting rusty, and the boys are fed up.
He hides it from his men, but Botter is burning out.
Well, more fighter sweeps, sir, is what we want. Thank you, sir. Good night. To get some sleep.
Douglas was never reckless, and he would never put me or a wingman or anybody else in danger. Douglas always took it on the chin as well. He never passed the buck. And that's why he was not too popular with various senior officers who had an inflated opinion of themselves.
August 9th, 1941. Botter takes to the sky with a flight of 4 Spitfires, intent on hunting down German planes over France.
Control, come in, this is Botter.
From the start, things go wrong. Botter's radio fails and his airspeed indicator is broken.
Dog's body from Beetle. There are 20 plus 5 miles to the east of you.
What ground control is trying to tell Botter is 12 Messerschmitt 109s have been spotted on radar. He's flying into a trap. He dives too fast, too steeply. All of a sudden, Wing Commander Botter is alone in a hostile sky. Botter clocks 6 more 109s. He gives chase, taking down 2. Moments later, 2 109s are on his tail, closing in for the kill.
When I came back, here's, everybody's face. Douglas hasn't come back.
And he just came in through the door and said, "Thelma, I'm sorry to tell you Douglas didn't come back today." Oh, the shock of it was simply awful. I mean, one was absolutely sort of frozen with horror.
This kind of thing couldn't happen to a man like Botter. But of course it can happen to anybody.
And of course, they couldn't tell us then whether he was dead or alive.
Almost physical feeling of sadness and sort of, this can't happen, it can't happen.
After 5 days, the Germans put out on the radio that they'd got him, so then we had a big celebration.
Botter is locked up in a German prison hospital. One of his false legs went down with a Spitfire. He wants a replacement.
In Germany, we didn't really have any facilities to manufacture wooden legs.
In an extraordinary accord, Luftwaffe leader Hermann Göring greenlights an RAF operation to airdrop a new leg.
So it was agreed, at a specific time and at a specific airfield, an English plane would fly over and throw down the wooden leg for Botter.
And it was just a package, a parachute floating down with a brown paper parcel swinging on it. That was Douglas's legs.
The Germans have no idea the trouble they've unleashed.
I think it was the second following night. Who was climbing out of the hospital window upstairs? Douglas. That's the type of man I'm talking about.
It's the first of many escape attempts. His captors become so exasperated they threaten to confiscate his false legs. Finally, they throw him into the supposedly escape-proof Colditz, where he languishes until the war's end. In 1945, he returns to his wife, Thelma, and Britain, a hero.
He was never spoilt by all that fame. That was the extraordinary thing.
Some historians argue Botter exaggerated his kills and embellished his life story, but there's no doubting his remarkable achievements. Douglas Botter, the ultimate symbol of the bulldog spirit, a man with artificial legs coming to the rescue of a nation on its knees.
He epitomized the Battle of Britain just as much as Churchill did.
He was the first person ever to lead a more or less normal life, so badly disabled as that. That's what was so marvellous about him. He was an inspiration to the world, really.
The Battle of Britain was not won by the Royal Air Force. It was won by everyone in this country, by the people on the ground who took the bombing, the fire services and all these auxiliary services who fought the flames, who didn't give up. I mean, anybody can, it's much easier, put it that way, it's much easier to go into the battle and fight than it is to sit on the ground and take it and watch you and me doing the fighting, you see what I mean? Yeah. So don't make any mistake, this Battle of Britain is the lot of us, it's not just the Royal Air Force.